So you've probably noticed over the past few weeks here on the F1 Chronicle that we've been going through the beginner's guide, really, because it's pre-season right now in Formula 1, and inevitably you'll have a lot of new fans come into the sport to enjoy it for the first time in 2025. At the end of the day, it was all of our first races at some point, all of our first seasons, all of our first Grand Prix at some point during the past. So it helps to have this information out there, and I hope that I've educated some of you relative newbies to the sport. And at the end of the day, every day is a school day. You know, you can always learn something new, and I hope these guides really go through that for you. So yeah, I've compilated all them together. I've edited them all together into one big video, a one-stop shop when it comes to Formula 1 and everything you need to know as a newcomer to the sport. So yeah, let's get into it, guys. Let's dive into this complete guide to Formula 1 for the new fans of the sport. Everybody was new to Formula 1 once. We all had our first Grand Prix that we ever watched. The first Grand Prix that I can remember watching was the 2005 San Marino Grand Prix, and I remember it very well because of the incredible battle between Michael Schumacher and Fernando Alonso around the incredible Imola circuit in Italy. That was one of the races that made me think, you know, this F1 stuff, it's actually pretty good, but it'd be better without advertisements. Take note ITV on that one, but those are very much long memories. 20 years ago, and I just realized that it's 2 decades ago this year. Man, I am old. Anyway, what's even older is Formula 1, and I wanted to give you guys some kind of a bit of a rundown, really, when it comes to the sport we love so much, you know, because like I said, at the end of the day, everybody's new to the sport once. We all want to learn about it. We all have to absorb a lot of information to understand what's going on in Formula 1, because unfortunately, it's not the easiest sport to get on with. It's a very much a big learning curve when you first join it. But that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here to help with. And today I'm answering the question. It's a simple question with a complicated answer, but I'm going to try and summarize it as best I can in a reasonable time. What is Formula 1? What is F1? How would you describe it? If you looked it up in the dictionary, if it had a definition, what would come up? Well, this is a good way that I've tried to summarize it for you guys. So let's dive into this. So, Formula 1, aka F1, is a series of races held at different venues around the world. These races have the fastest open wheel, open cabin, single-seated, four-wheeled cars in the world. There have been a few years where even six-wheeled cars participated in F1. I did a video on the Tyrrell six-wheeler and some other strange Formula 1 designs with my good friend N. Bernard not too long ago, so check that out video if you haven't seen it already. The word formula included in the name refers to a set of rules that constructors of the car must adhere to in order to enter their car. So the series is effectively named after the regulations which govern how cars are constructed, i.e. the formula that you must adhere to compete in F1. When motor racing first began in the early 20th century in France, hence why a lot of motorsport terms these days are actually French. Grand Prix means grand prize. The FIA is in France, of course, as well, the governing body of Formula 1, and a lot of teams are, and some teams, of course, have French origins, such as Renault and Alpine, of course. But when motorsport first began back in those days, there were no limitations on the power or the size of the cars. The races became unequal, with cars with more power and bigger sizes easily outpacing the smaller cars. The races also created dangerous situations in which many participants got seriously hurt, some even fatally. Formula 1 unfortunately has a very dark history when it comes to the amount of drivers that have passed away over the decades. Thankfully, though, that is pretty much consigned to the history books, but Formula 1 always chases the best safety possible in motorsport, which always making strive to do so. When racing resumed after the Second World War, the governing body of the sport, the FIA, introduced a set of rules that set limits on the size and power of the cars. This created an even playing field for the participants and drivers, while most of the emphasis was laid on the efficiency and the design of the cars and also the capability of the drivers, rather than the size of the engines that you can actually fit on the car itself. The one part of Formula 1 comes from the grading FIA issues to the racing tracks. You may have heard of Grade 1 circuits being the only ones that can host Formula 1 Grand Prix, and the approved cars and the driver's licenses also follow suit in this regard. The 1 is also thought to distinguish F1 from street car racing and also to indicate that it is the ultimate in Formula racing. It is, of course, known as the pinnacle of motorsport for a reason. Formula 1 is governed by the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, FIA, that I mentioned before in my very terrible French, owned by the Formula 1 group. The FIA, which was established on the 20th of June 1904, is a non-profit organisation and represents the interest of motoring organisations and motor car users alike. The organisation amends, alters and introduces rules to F1 so that it ensures the safety of the participants in the races, promotes fair play, and ensures that the followers and spectators of Formula 1 get a good deal. Totally not controversially, but we're not going to open that can of worms. That is the briefest summary I can give to F1. Throughout this month, we're going to be bringing you as much information as we can when it comes to getting started in Formula 1, because at the end of the day, everybody has a first race in Formula 1, and the 2025 season is coming up. So before we look ahead to the future, let's have a look at the past. Let's have a look all the way back to the origins of Formula 1. How did F1 get started? Well, I'm going to walk you through that in today's explainer video on the history of Formula 1, how F1 got started. Formula 1 originated with the European Championship of Grand Prix races. This took place from the early 1900s when the Grand Prix was first invented in France, all the way until the Second World War. It was basically Formula 1 before F1 was a thing. Some stars that you may know from their F1 days, such as Nino Farina, also were greats during this era, and this was also the era of fantastic drivers such as Tazio Nuvolari, who the great Murray Walker said was the greatest Grand Prix driver ever, but he of course never competed in Formula 1. Though several Grand Prix organisations agreed to the formula or a set of rules before the Second World War, races were suspended during the war, and this is where the name for F1 comes from. Formula 1 is basically referring to the rules which govern how the cars can be built. To enter a Formula 1 car, it has to adhere to the Formula 1 rules, and that is something that is still the case to this day thanks to the technical regulations. Formula 1, which was a new set of rules, were agreed upon by the organisations of racing in 1946, just after the Second World War. The first non-championship race was the Turin Grand Prix, held the same year in Italy. The following year, the World Drivers' Championship was formalised. Achille Varzi, an Italian driver, won the race in an Alfa Romeo. The first World Championship race of Formula 1, though, was held in 1950 at Silverstone in the UK, the British Grand Prix. Giuseppe Nino Farina, an Italian driver in his Alfa Romeo, was the first driver to win the World Drivers' Championship that year. Juan Manuel Fangio, an Argentine driver and Farina's teammate, narrowly missed out on the championship title in 1950, but Fangio came back strongly to win in 1951, and he also won in 54, 55, 56 and 57, becoming a 5-time Formula 1 champion. That was something that stood the test of time all the way until Michael Schumacher's 5th World Championship, well, technically his 6th World Championship, would have broken it in 2003. The Constructors' Championship wasn't introduced straight away, though. This was not a part of the Formula 1 Championship until 1958. Back then it was called the International Cup for F1 manufacturers, and the first winner of the cup was Vanwall, a team that is very much confined to the history pages these days. According to the FIA, the Constructors' Championship is the constructor of an engine or chassis, is the person, including any corporate or an unincorporated body, which owns the intellectual rights such as engines or chassis. And that's the reason why teams have had names such as McLaren Renault in the past and currently have McLaren Mercedes. And it means that while the chassis of the F1 car was built by McLaren, the engine is currently supplied by Mercedes. So even though Mercedes works car, the Mercedes AMG car, missed out on the Constructors' title in 24, the engine manufacturer, the company Mercedes, technically won one in the form of engine suppliers to McLaren. And that basically means that both parties work together and both parties succeed as well as constructors. Over the years, there have been only 5 countries that have shared the Constructors' Championship between them. These countries are the UK, which leads with 33 championships, Italy with 16, Germany with 8, Austria with 4, and France with 3. Ferrari Ferrari of Italy, with 16 championships, is the top constructors to date, but they haven't won since 2008. Formula 1 went through many changes in its rules during the last 7.5 decades, and most of the changes were aimed at minimising the risk to the cars and the drivers and increasing the spectator appeal of the sport. There were changes in engine size, car widths, lengths, fuel tank sizes, and the types of tyres allowed. So yeah, that's kind of a rundown of Formula 1 and how it got started, really. And something I'd like to add to that is the fact that really Formula 1 was so popular in its early days, mainly because a lot of these drivers were fighter pilots. They were people that fought in the Second World War, and they were looking for something to, in their pastimes effectively, to actually do, and something exciting. And obviously they couldn't go out and fight in wars all the time because, you know, there wasn't always a war, and it was also very dangerous to do so. So going motor racing was kind of a halfway house of that. It's how the fighter pilots of the Second World War spent their, you know, civilian days, if you will. I'm sure there's been a lot of drivers that have been in the RAF and other air forces like that have competed in Grand Prix racing. So that's kind of how it got started, and from there, the danger, the spectacle, the speed of it all, it just made it very, very popular, and something that is still extremely popular to this day, being of course the most popular motorsport in the world, and most popular motorsport in most countries in the world as well. So Formula 1 cars are the fastest cars in the world of motorsport. They can achieve some of the fastest speeds possible of over 200 miles an hour down the longest straights of the circuits on the F1 calendar, while also making some of the most high levels of downforce in order to get round the corners as fast as possible too. So I'm just going to go through some of the basics of what makes an F1 car an F1 car, and just go through some of the facts really when it comes to that. So if you want to get a kind of basic rundown of what Formula 1 cars are and why they're so quick, this is the place to be. Now, the most literal answer when it comes to what is a Formula 1 car, it's a car that's entered in the Formula 1 World Championship. And now, to actually enter a car into the Formula 1 World Championship, you have to have a vehicle that adheres to the Formula 1 rules. F1's a bit of a strange one in that it is named after the regulations which govern the car itself. So that is the formula for making a car, and it's the top formula, so it's Formula 1. That's where the name comes from. So it's literally named after the regulations themselves, and in order to enter a car legally, it's got to adhere to them. That's the easiest way to describe it. Now, these cars have evolved drastically over the years, and of course Formula 1 goes all the way back to 1950. So 75 years ago, you had supercharged front engine monsters, and these days you've got some incredibly beautiful Formula 1 cars that, again, they're the fastest cars that have ever been made. Formula 1 right now is faster than it ever has been, I believe, in terms of the overall speed. Although I'm sure some will dispute that. It depends how you define it with things like engine settings and tyres, of course, which have changed a lot over the years as well. But the main difference really is safety. Today's cars are much safer and more manoeuvrable than they ever have been. And because of that, fatalities, thank God, are a thing of the past in Formula 1. We've not seen one for a very long time, and I hope and I pray that we never do see one again. But in the strive for safety, Formula 1 is always trying to improve this aspect of the regulations as time goes on. The aerodynamics too have changed a lot as well. In 1950, for example, there were no aerodynamics basically. Nowadays, you've got incredibly complex wings and floors that generate downforce all over the car in the pursuit of speed. And because of that as well, drivers have better control over the cars, resulting in better speeds and fewer accidents on the whole too. However, F1 cars still have open wheels and open cockpits and are single-seated. That is something that has never changed. Some people might say, oh, well, it's not open cockpit because you've got the halo there. No, it's still open cockpit, but just with a bit more head protection to prevent some horrible fatalities reoccurring again, like we saw in the past. The body of the F1 cars are made from lightweight materials such as carbon fiber. In fact, they're actually made from one massive piece of carbon fiber that is a monocoque, which I believe is French for one piece or something similar to that, or one structure. And that helps to keep the car as light as possible and also strong during the event of an accident. The cars are also designed to be as aerodynamic as possible too, with sleek, low-slung bodies and complex aerodynamic features such as wing and diffusers. Under the hood, F1 cars are powered by a highly advanced engine that can produce over 1000 horsepower. And in truth, I should really use the term power unit, because engine refers to the internal combustion engine part of the power unit. You also have other aspects in there, such as the electrical energy, which produces something in the region of 200 horsepower these days, something like that. And for 2026, when the regulations change, of course, that will be a 50-50 split. So in theory, that will have a power unit that is around the same. I think they're predicting around 1000 horsepower still, but it'll be around 500 horsepower made from the internal combustion engine that's produced from the fuel, and 500 horsepower that's produced purely from electrical energy, which is a massive increase on what we have today. But the engines today that we have are V6 turbocharged units, and they are designed to be as efficient and as powerful as possible. And again, the lightweightness also comes into there too, and they're also put in a part of the car that allows for 50-50 weight distribution, i.e. behind the driver. One of the most distinctive features of Formula 1 cars these days is its open cockpit, which allows drivers to be fully exposed to the elements and give them a clear view of the track ahead. Again, despite the halo being there, the view that these guys have out of the cockpit is actually pretty good, although it'll be a lot less than in your road car, of course, in everyday life. And the driver sits in a low slung seat that's designed to be as comfortable and supportive as possible, and they are all surrounded by a roll cage for safety. Again, the survival cell in Formula 1 has saved dozens of lives, and it is constantly being improved. The most recent changes we saw to that, or the most recent major changes we've seen after that, have been after Romain Grosjean's crash in Bahrain in 2020, where he was very lucky to survive, really. And in terms of the seating position for F1 drivers as well, I mean, you'd never guess it just looking at them, but they're so low to the ground, Formula 1 cars. If you've never seen one in person, they are tiny in terms of the height of them overall. They're massive in terms of their profile. They're as big as Mercedes Maybach in terms of their overall footprint on the track. But in terms of the height, they're literally like go-karts. They're tiny. And because of that as well, the drivers basically, they're sat laying down. They're like they look like they're just chilling in like a deck chair or something like that. You can't tell just from outside, obviously, but if you actually were to take a bit of an x-ray of it, you would see that they're pretty much laid on their back in almost a completely flat position. So I've already covered how Formula 1 cars are developed after they've been designed. After all, the development race in Formula 1 is one of the most important ones around. We've seen that in 2024 in the most pure form in terms of how much Red Bull dropped off as the season went on, and then eventually recovered at least some of that pace advantage they had at the start of the season to the rest of the field. But how are Formula 1 cars designed in the first place? And this is a really good time really to answer that question, because that is exactly what all the teams are going to be doing. They will be hard at work designing the best possible Formula 1 car, not only for this season in 2025, but also next season in 2026 as well, as we get a big change in the regulations. So let's go over this, guys. Here's a brief look at how Formula 1 cars are designed. F1 cars are aerodynamically designed to provide the least resistance as they cut through the air. The feature not only helps them attain great speeds, but also consumes less fuel and gives them a better grip on the tarmac as well. Because of their aerodynamic design, Formula 1 cars attain a speed greater than that of airliners jets at takeoff, but the wings and the diffusers of the car produce a negative lift or a downforce that presses the car to the track. And of course, it is reversed for airplanes because they lift up and get off the ground. If it wasn't for that, the drivers would have little control over the cars, as the cars would be airborne over the track because of the airlift. They literally would. They would literally fly. And if you want to see what some of that lift can actually do, go look up Mark Webber's crash at Le Mans in 1999, I think it was, when he was driving the Mercedes. His audio book for True Aussie Grit, I think it's called, gives some stories on that. So when things are designed not too great and they go past a bit of engineering insanity, that is what usually happens. An F1 car produces a downforce of up to 5G on average, and that means that 5 times the weight of the car is pressing down on the track. This gives the tyres traction and prevents the car from skidding on bends and sharp corners, and the downforce also allows for drivers to take corners and bends at speeds much higher than we would in our road cars. So effectively what this all does is that instead of it just being 1G, the mass of the car pushing down, the force of that, it's 5 times that. So you effectively got, what are Formula 1 cars now? 750 kilograms top of my head, something like that. So 5 times that, you're talking about over 3.5 metric tons, and that is all pushing down on the car, and it's all to do with the speed as well. So like I was saying at the start there, because of the cars being aerodynamically designed to provide the least resistance possible, that is true. They are obviously designed to cut through the air as efficiently as possible, but they also must do so while creating plenty of downforce. In a straight line, the air resistance of the cars, the drag coefficient effectively, the drag that the object produces, this, we're getting into a bit of physics engineering terms here, but hopefully you can bear with me here. But basically that is from, I believe it's from 0 to 1, and if you're 1, it is just pure drag. You're producing so much drag for how much surface area your object is. At 0, it's obviously flying through the air, no problems. Formula 1 cars actually produce quite high drag coefficients, but that is because it's in the aim of actually making more downforce. Downforce is what actually makes the cars go faster around corners. Now, straight line speed is great, but downforce is king in Formula 1, and that also leads to some problems when it comes to overtaking, obviously, as well, because then you get things like the dirty air. Now, I've done a full explainer video going over that as well a while ago, but dirty air effectively means that your aerodynamics will not produce the same amount of downforce as they would in clean air, fresh air. But with dirty air, obviously, you've got a car in front of you that's creating a turbulent wake. You're not getting your aerodynamics working efficiently as possible. So therefore, you don't go as fast around corners. You lose speed during the corners. And then when you do get to a straight, even the DRS effect is still not enough sometimes to actually be able to overtake. So there we go. That's kind of the fundamentals of F1 car design. Obviously, when it comes to actually designing them, the engineers, they all use CFD, computational fluid dynamics software to basically go over like what will happen. They use things like wind tunnels, which I've also explained in depth. Or if you're Adrian Newey, you're the last of the drawing board engineers, because he's the only one apparently, especially in a lead design role, that uses a drawing board to create a Formula 1 car. And I'm sure he'll be hard at work very soon in the coming months working on the 2026 Aston Martin Formula 1 car as well, because like I said, big regulation changes on the way. Formula 1 engines are very powerful, efficient and effective pieces of kit, but what are they in the modern era in Formula 1? How have they changed over the years, and what is likely to happen in the future of Formula 1 when it comes to its engines? Well, let's dive into this, guys. Let's go over everything to do with Formula 1 engines. Since 2014, all F1 cars have had 1.6 litre V6 turbocharged engines. To those who are uninitiated, the number after V stands for the number of cylinders in their engines. So these current engines have 6 cylinders arranged in a V formation, so 3 on either side. The number before L represents the displacement volume in litres for all the cylinders of the engine taken together. So this has 1.6 litres. If you can imagine what a 1.6 litre bottle or a 1.5 litre bottle would be, that is the overall displacement, which really puts into perspective how efficient these engines are, because the actual ICE part of the engine, we'll get onto the electric soon, but the actual ICE part of the engine produces something like 800 horsepower. A 1.6 litre engine is actually a fairly standard size engine for a road car. But can you imagine having 800 horsepower in your car? Maybe you can, maybe you do, I don't know, but you won't be able to get it from 1.6 litres. You'd have to have probably at least a 6 litre engine to manage that these days. But how does the engine fit into the car in terms of how much space it takes up, how much weight it is? Well, F1 cars these days are required to weigh a minimum of 746 kilograms without the driver and fuel in them. Constructors, along with other members of the team, including drivers, have to optimize the horsepower, torque and fuel efficiency to suit the requirements. That is why F1 cars' engines are fine-tuned for every single F1 circuit. Now, the overall package for power units these days, including the ICE and all the electrical components, is very heavy. The weight of these engines is a significant part of why these cars are so heavy, and indeed it's not been uncommon in recent years for the cars to be over that minimum weight requirement, and that's not something you want. The lighter the car is, the easier it is in terms of the overall pace that it can have. So if it's heavier, it'll use more fuel, the tyres will wear down faster, and overall it will be slower in both a straight line and especially during corners. You want to make sure that that weight is as low as possible, but obviously still be above the minimum. That is the key. If you don't, you'll be disqualified. Now, when it comes to F1 engines, there are certain regulations when it comes to making sure that these engines are legal and competitive in Formula 1. After all, you don't want a big disparity in the performance of engines, because then the cars will be a lot different and the sport just will not be competitive. And one of the things that's limited these days is the revolutions per minute, or revs, the RPM of the engines. Now, this is limited to 15,000 currently in the engine regulations, but if you actually go and ride on board with the cars, they won't really go much above 11 or 12,000 RPM. So why the big difference there? Well, it's all down to fuel consumption, and it's also because these engines, these power units, depending on the component, you're only allowed either 2 or 3 across an entire season. So that includes your practice, your qualifying, your sprint races, your Grand Prix races. All has to be done on around 3 or 2 of these different components per season. That is a massive toll, so you can't run them at full pelt, otherwise they will wear down faster and you'll need to take engine penalties. And indeed, a lot of people actually do take engine penalties throughout the season. It's not something that's uncommon at all. Max Verstappen took one in Brazil and also Belgium, I think, this year, so it's not something unheard of. But how fast do these engines actually make the cars? Well, depending on the circuit, you can get speeds of up to 235 miles per hour, which is around 375 kilometers an hour. Now, depending on the track, this can happen. If you get a bit of a tow, if you have DRS activated and you're on a flying lap, you can definitely achieve that. Monza is one of the ones, that's the fastest F1 track on the calendar, and therefore along the main pit straight you can get some massive top speeds. Mexico as well has a huge long straight going down the pits, and it's at high altitude, which also means that the cars can run faster. Las Vegas is a very quick one too, as is Baku, both of those being street circuits, but with some very long straights, and if you get a tow down those, you can get a very high top speed too. But the record for the highest top speed, apparently, officially, is Juan Pablo Montoya. Now, he did that at the Italian Grand Prix in 2005 while driving a McLaren Mercedes, and that was around 231 miles an hour. Apparently, that has been beaten since then. I think Bottas beat it in either Baku or Mexico City. I'm not quite sure. But either way, it's a lot. It's a lot. And just a quick word on the electrical components as well. Electrical components in the Formula 1 cars these days, I think they produce around 160 brake horsepower. They just basically harvest energy that's been used for braking and also the heat of the engine that's recycled. I'll probably make a video going over that in more depth because it's quite complicated, but that's all you need to know. That electrical power is then redistributed as electrical power through the car's axle, and because of that you get some extra power, and it's used pretty much across the entire circuit. I think you can have something like you can hold around 30-40 seconds of that, but that's all going to change in 2026 next year, because obviously the amount of electrical power will increase massively to be 50-50 in terms of power that is produced by the ICE itself. So we're going to see some big changes there, and you'll also hear older F1 fans, me included of course, you know, sometimes yearning for the days of the V8s and the V10s and the V12s. What do we actually mean by this? Well, it's more the noise of the engine, and the overall power of it is actually, for a lot of cases, less than what it is today, but it's the noise that a lot of people want, the sound they really crave, and I do miss that, I'll be honest. But these new engines are very loud. Don't get away from that fact. If you think these new engines are quiet, they can seem that way on the TV, but in person, trust me, they're not quiet. They are very loud. But there were different eras before this in Formula 1 when it came to the engines. Before this, we used to have, I think it was 2.4 litre V8s between 2006 and 2013, although the Toro Rosso did run a V10 engine into 2006, but the majority of engines were V8s by that time. Before that, we had the V10 engines that ran from, 96 till 2005. These were 3 litre engines. These were monsters during that time. And before that, you could have V12s. Ferrari made a V12 until 1995, although most engines were V10s or V8s by that time. And before that, we had different things. We had an old turbo era back in the 1980s, which I've covered in a engineered insanity video that I really do like. I do love that phrase. But yeah, we could go on about that. But even after you used to have supercharged engines back in the original days of F1 too. But we're not going to get into that. But yeah, for the modern era of Formula 1, they're going to be 1.6 litre V6 turbocharged engines this year, before switching to a different configuration in 2026 with a lot more electrical power to help drive that fuel consumption down. So tyres, when they go right in Formula 1, no one talks about them. When they go wrong, everybody is talking about them. Those 4 black circular objects are so important to every single Formula One car, and I've spoken a lot about tyres in Formula One. I've even interviewed the head of Pirelli's motorsport course, with Pirelli being the sole tyre supplier to Formula One ever since 2011, and they've signed on for a good number of seasons to come as well. I've interviewed the head of their motorsport division, Mario Vasseur, on a number of occasions. Really nice guy, and I've spoken about how Formula One teams use their tyres, how Pirelli supplies them and everything, but I just want to go over them in a little more detail really when it comes to that. Just a beginner's guide thing here on the F1Chronicle.com, guys. So here's a very basic kind of look at tyres in Formula One. Tyres play a big part in F1 races. Pirelli is the officially recognised tyre supplier for Formula One. Unlike street car tyres, F1 tyres are built to last only between 60 to 120 kilometers. Roughly in terms of a Grand Prix, because that is just over 305 kilometers in total, you're talking somewhere between 1/5 and around 1/3 of the race as a whole. Because one set of tyres will not last the distance of any F1 race, drivers have to make pit stops to replace tyres so that they complete the races. Now, of course, in F1, you don't have to do a pit stop. There are some circumstances where you don't have to do that, and it pretty much depends on the weather. If it's wet, you don't have to use 2 dry compounds of tyre. However, if it's dry, like the vast majority of Formula One races are, you have to use at least 2, which means you need to do at least 1 pit stop during the race. In the modern era of Formula One in 2024, most races were 1 stops. There were some that were 2, and the very occasional one with 3 stops, but that's generally what happens, just a couple pit stops or so, not like the early Pirelli days where you would see some people doing 4 and 5 stops. It was a bit crazy, to be honest, back then. F1 car tyres are rated anywhere from C1 to C5, with C1 being the hardest tyre and C5 being the softest. Now, during a race weekend, you will always see for the dry tyres that there are hard, medium and soft compound, the white, yellow and red band Pirellis respectively. Now, which C compound these are depends on the circuit. So for Monaco, for example, where the speeds are a lot lower and therefore the tyre wear is a lot lower too, they will use the 3 softest compounds, the 3, the 4 and the 5. Whereas a track with a lot higher tyre wear, I'm not sure, maybe Silverstone or somewhere like that where there's a lot more high speed corners, they will use the hardest ones potentially, which is C1, 2 and 3. Now, Pirelli of course determines which ones to use by using previous races, track data, weather conditions, all that sort of stuff all plays into it. And Pirelli, like I said, they've been in Formula One now for 14 complete seasons as the sole tyre supplier, so they have a lot of data to be able to call upon when it comes to making these decisions. Now, until the conclusion of the 2021 season, Formula One uses 13-inch tyres. However, in 2022, they moved to 18-inch tyres as part of a raft of new technical regulations designed to make the racing more even. And on top of that as well, they also decided to do this to make it more relevant. I think the last car that had a 13-inch tyre in production was something like a Mini Cooper or a Fiat 500. An 18-inch tyre is much more applicable to modern road cars and therefore modern cars in general, so that's why they did it. At first it looked a bit odd, but now it looks very strange looking back at old Formula One cars with these dinky little tyres on them. But that's a very brief overview of what tyres are in Formula One. Like I said, I've spoken to Mario Vasseur many moons ago. I'll probably speak to him again soon if I can get an interview with him. Mario, if you're watching, ciao. Good to catch up sometimes, my friend. Everybody was new to Formula One once. We've all had a first Grand Prix that we either watched or attended. So with that in mind, and the new season for 2025 not that far away, it's going to kick off in just over 2 months time, and of course the car reveals, the livery reveals and pre-season testing will all be taking place in January, and in particular in February. I wanted to get ahead of the game by introducing you guys to a beginner's guide to Formula One, and today we're going to talk about the teams, the actual teams that compete in Formula One these days. Who are they? Which drivers have they got? What's the brief background on them? I'm going to go through all 10 teams in Formula One as fast as I can. So you may not realize it, but every one of Formula One's 10 teams employs hundreds of technicians, engineers and support staff. It's about a lot more than the 2 drivers that you see racing the car each weekend. If you include the designers and the assembly employees as well, that number exceeds 1,000 for the vast majority of the 10 teams. There are 10 teams enrolled in the Formula 1 season for 2025, and this will expand to 11 teams in 2026 when Cadillac Racing joins the grid as the fabled 11th team. Like I just mentioned, each team can field 2 drivers for each race weekend. So let's jump into who these are. So we have the reigning Constructors Champions McLaren. They won their first Constructors Championship since 1998 in 2024, and they retain their driver lineup of Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. They'll be looking to pick up their first Drivers' Championship since 2008 after Lando Norris finished runner-up in the championship last season. Of course, they're a very historical team. They've been around since the 1960s, and they're powered by Mercedes engines. Next up, second in the Constructors last season was Ferrari. Ferrari, historically the most successful team in Formula 1 with the most drivers, Constructors Championships as well as the most wins, podiums, fastest laps, all the rest. They're the only team to have competed in every single Grand Prix Formula 1 season since 1950, and they actually date to even further back than that. They retain Charles Leclerc, the boy wonder for their team, in 2026, and they are joined by the most successful driver in the history of Formula 1, Sir Lewis Hamilton, where he'll compete in red overalls for the first time in 2026 and the first time not being powered by Mercedes in his Formula 1 career. Third in the Constructors last season was Red Bull Racing. They keep their 4-time world champion Max Verstappen for 2026, and he is joined by Liam Lawson, the New Zealander driver, in his first full season of Formula 1 racing after making cameo appearances in both 2023 and 2024 for the junior team AlphaTauri, rebranded again to Racing Bulls for this year, but more on them very soon. Red Bull, of course, have had a lot of success in recent times in Formula 1, winning a number of Constructors titles and also quite a few Drivers titles as well, with Verstappen currently and Sebastian Vettel in the past too. Fourth overall in the championship last season was Mercedes. They retained George Russell for this year, and he is joined by Kimi Antonelli, the 18-year-old Italian rookie who is named after the 2007 Formula 1 world champion Kimi Raikkonen, who is also Ferrari's last Drivers' Champion as well. Mercedes dominated the start of the hybrid era in Formula 1, but can they end it on a high before going into the big regulation change in 2026? They'll certainly be hoping so. Fifth place last season was Aston Martin. They retain the same driver lineup for 2025. They have Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. They are powered by Mercedes engines for the final time in 2025 before switching to their own bespoke Honda engines in 26. Aston Martin ended 2024 on a very much a low, with them being one of the slowest cars on the grid, but they'll be hoping for an uptick in performance in 2025. Sixth overall last season was Alpine. They maintain Pierre Gasly for this season coming up, and he's joined by Jack Doohan, son of Mick Doohan, the 5-time MotoGP champion from the 1990s. Jack Doohan, of course, an Australian racer as well. He'll be competing in his first full season of Grand Prix racing after making a cameo appearance at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix last year. Seventh overall in the championship last season were Haas F1. After being absolutely terrible in 2023, where they were bottom of the Constructors, they absolutely rose up massively under Ayao Komatsu. Haas are, in a sense, to an extent, a bit of a Ferrari B team, but I have, kind of said that recently they've kind of shaken off that tag. They're doing their own thing these days. Like I said, Komatsu is doing an excellent job with them. They are powered by the Ferrari power unit, and they have many parts from Ferrari that they buy in. They have an entirely new lineup for 2025. Ollie Behrman will be competing in his first full season of Grand Prix racing after a couple of cameo appearances for Haas last season, and he's joined by Esteban Ocon, who joins from Alpine after his rather controversial exit from the team, shall we put it. More information from that in some of my older videos if you want to look it up. Haas, of course, the only American team in Formula 1. Eighth overall last season was the Racing Bulls. They were called RB last year, but they're back as the Racing Bulls this year. Yuki Tsunoda enters this season as the most experienced Racing Bull driver of all time in his 5th season with the Red Bull B team. Of course, Racing Bulls are the B team officially to Red Bull Racing. And Isaac Hadjar, the Formula 2 runner-up from 2024, joins the Japanese driver Yuki Tsunoda. I'm really excited to see what Hadjar can do this year, and with the Honda power unit, the Red Bull powertrain Honda engine, or whatever it's known as these days, in the back of the car, just like the senior Red Bull team, I think they've got a very good chance of shaking up the order on their day. Williams, they have arguably one of the best driver lineups in the sport. They finished 9th overall last season, which was not very good for them at all. A lot of crashes, of course. Alexander Albon maintains his place, the Thai driver, and he's joined by Carlos Sainz, who comes from Ferrari. That's a real coup for Williams, showing that, you know, they're a team that have won a lot of championships in the past. They're one of the most successful teams in Formula 1. I think McLaren have matched them now for Constructors' Championships, and they are 3rd overall in terms of Drivers' Championships as well. They haven't won a championship for a very, very long time. The last time they did that was 1997, and it's been a very long time since they've even won a race. Williams last winning a race, I believe, with the legend that is Pastor Maldonado in 2012. It's been a long, long time, but they'll be hoping to get back up the order in the coming years. And the final team, Sauber, the last year they'll be known as Sauber, for now at least, they are being taken over officially by Audi for 2026, where they'll have their own engines as well. For now, though, they are still known as Sauber. The Swiss team are powered by Ferrari engines. The real minnows in Formula 1 these days. They've really struggled over the last 10 years, if not even longer, to be honest with you. They have an entirely new lineup, of course. They have ditched Valtteri Bottas and Guan Yu Zhou, who both exit the sport as full-time drivers. Nico Hülkenberg joins from Haas, and Gabriel Bortoleto, the Formula 2 champion, joins from, well, the McLaren development program, but he, of course, was racing in F2 last year, so he is a rookie this year, and the first Brazilian full-time driver since Felipe Massa in 2017. The first Brazilian of any kind to compete in a Grand Prix weekend, I believe, since one of the Fittipaldi brothers. I always forget which one. I think is it Pietro, is it Enzo? I always get mixed up between the two of them. Anyway, one of the grandsons of the great Emerson Fittipaldi. So Formula 1 drivers, we know of them, but what does it take to actually become one? Well, a lot of hard work, a lot of commitment, a lot of money from either your side or your sponsor's side, and some very important qualifications as well. But let's dive into this, guys. Here are the basics when it comes to becoming a Formula 1 driver. If you know their names, the likes of Sir Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, you might be surprised to hear about what they actually have to achieve in order to be a Formula 1 driver. F1 drivers these days are as fit as most athletes in any sport. They have a very high stamina and extremely good reflexes. Driving a race is very demanding both physically and mentally. Anybody who's played the Formula 1 game and raced around Monaco or Singapore for 2 hours will know how difficult it is, but that's in the comfort of your own living room. Imagine going out there to the circuit for real. It's a lot tougher, let me tell you that. That is why drivers dedicate a lot of time to both fitness during the season and otherwise maintaining their physical health and well-being throughout. All F1 drivers lose weight at the end of the race, and that is because a lot of energy is spent by the drivers in working the brake and throttle pedals and also concentrating on the track. And without wanting to get too graphic, it's also sweat as well. I think in Singapore they'll lose 3-4 kilograms of sweat, which is a lot. That's a lot. You'll be very dehydrated if you lost that much water. You definitely know about it. And also a lot of energy is also spent when countering the G-forces on the bends during sharp corners, even the more gentle corners, even the more gentle braking zones. It would be very much a shock to the system for us, the average everyday person, to experience that. It's far more than what you'd get even in an emergency stop during your road car, while in your road car, I should say. And G-force is the force of driver experiences when they accelerate or the car is going around a bend or a corner on the track. F1 drivers will normally experience a force of 2G when accelerating and up to 6G on a sharp corner. That effectively means that any part of your body weighs between 2 and 6 times what it would normally. So if you're stepping on the brake pedal and getting 6 Gs through your neck, your head will effectively weigh 6 times what it would do normally, which would really put a strain on it at that point. I think I'd probably get a neck injury if that happened to me, and most people would too, and that's why the F1 drivers have such strong necks. They look a bit ridiculous, to be honest with you, but it's what they need to actually survive. And survive is the key word here. Survive a Grand Prix distant in a Formula 1 car. Although a driver's body is firmly strapped into their seat, their neck as well as their legs are free to move. Keeping the leg and neck in position during these high G-forces takes a lot of strength and effort, and that's why F1 drivers assign a high priority to strengthen their neck muscles for high endurance. When it comes to the F1 drivers as well, they have to have something called a FIA super license. That is the minimum requirement to be able to drive a Formula 1 car. Now, getting this is quite complicated, but effectively, if you win other motorsport categories such as Formula 2, such as the World Endurance Championship, Formula 3, IndyCar, you get a certain amount of points assigned to your application, effectively, your profile, to get a super license. If you get enough of these points, you get into Formula 1, and each one of these different categories is weighted differently in terms of who actually is able to drive in Formula 1. But in general, if you win F2, if you get in the top 3 of F2, you'll probably make it to F1 based upon that. And with that as well, I'm just going to give a very quick rundown of the 20 drivers that are contracted to compete in Formula 1 during the 2025 season, just in case you guys have missed the full lineups, because there's been quite a few changes as well. Even people who were confirmed are no longer confirmed. So I'll do it now and just read out the teams and their drivers in alphabetical order of the team. So to start with, we've got Alpine, who keep Pierre Gasly and get one of their academy drivers, Jack Doohan, to a full-time race seat. At Aston Martin, they keep with Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll from the previous season. Ferrari maintain Charles Leclerc, and they also have Sir Lewis Hamilton joining for 2025. Esteban Ocon has joined Haas, and joined with him is Ollie Behrman, as they've got an all-new lineup for 2025. It's also an all-new lineup as well at Sauber, who will eventually become Audi for 2026, but right now they've got Gabriel Bortoleto and Nico Hülkenberg in their cars. McLaren stay with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri from 2024 in 2025. Mercedes bring their academy driver Andrea Kimi Antonelli into the car for the first time as a rookie, and also keep George Russell. The Racing Bulls have kept Yuki Tsunoda, and he is joined by Isaac Hadjar from their academy. Red Bull Racing have kept world champion Max Verstappen, and he's joined by Liam Lawson. And lastly, Williams, they keep Alexander Albon, but he is joined now by Carlos Sainz Jr., son of the famous rally driver from WRC, the world champion as well in 95, I think it was. But yeah, there we go, guys. That's a rundown of what it takes to be a Formula 1 driver. Sounds easy, right? Well, it's not. It's very tough. It's really, really tough. There's a reason why there's only 20 of them, and there's a definite pool of talent to bring people in, but that pool is not exactly flush for bodies, really, when it comes to the amount of people who can drive a Formula 1 car. What makes a racing circuit fit for Formula 1? The answer might not be as simple as what you're expecting. There's 24 races on the 2025 Formula 1 calendar, and they all share some certain characteristics, despite being very varied in terms of their speed and overall layout. There's not many similarities between Monza in Italy and the Monte Carlo streets in Monaco, but they do share certain characteristics, which I'm going to get into during this video. So here we go, guys. Here's everything you need to know about Formula 1 circuits in F1. A Formula 1 circuit is a section of road or a purpose-built track that is approved by the FIA as a racetrack fit for F1 racing. This is done by giving it a Grade 1 license. To be on the F1 calendar, you have to achieve a Grade 1 status, and achieving that does vary, but there are some certain rules that you have to adhere to when it comes to this. In fact, a lot of former Formula 1 circuits, such as Kyalami, that are trying to get back onto the calendar, are not Grade 1. Despite hosting over, 20 Grand Prix back in the day in South Africa, Kyalami is not a Grade 1 circuit, so it needs to make changes in order to get back onto the F1 calendar, which I really hope it does. But in simple terms, in the most literal terms, what are these circuits? Well, a circuit usually starts with a straight stretch and has several turns and corners throughout its run. The pitch straight usually leads into turn 1 or skips out turn 1 and is usually around or before the last corner of the track. Most circuits run in a clockwise direction, but increasingly new circuits on the Formula 1 calendar move in an anti-clockwise direction. If you're wondering what the difference is there, clockwise circuits have more right-hand corners than left, and anti-clockwise circuits have more left-hand corners than right. So if you imagine them starting, they would go to the right more often than to the left in a clockwise track, and the opposite is true for anti-clockwise tracks, or counterclockwise if you will, here in the UK as we call it. Those few that are anti-clockwise though give the drivers the most trouble because of the G-forces on their necks in a direction that they are used to. The more anti-clockwise tracks you get on the calendar though, that does seem to decrease, but it's still more challenging to do that. One of the older tracks that is anti-clockwise on the F1 calendar is Interlagos in Brazil. The average time taken for a race is around 2 hours, and the average distance of a circuit overall after all the laps have been completed is 305 kilometers, which is about 119 miles. Now the distance does vary depending on the track when it comes to this, because that is the minimum amount of distance that a Grand Prix has to achieve, with one exception, and we will get into that of course, and that is of course Monaco. That has a distance of 260 kilometers or 161 miles because Monaco just is different. The average speed there is far too low to be able to do 305 kilometers an hour, because it would mean that the race would take around 2.5 or 3 hours rather than a mandated maximum of 2 hours. One run around a circuit is counted as one lap, and races usually are specified as the number of laps around a particular circuit. The minimum amount of laps required on the Formula 1 calendar currently is for Spa-Francorchamps because of its very long circuit layout. You only have to do 44 laps around there for it to be a complete race, whereas the maximum amount is for Monaco, which is set at 79, but that of course, like we already established, does not encompass 305 kilometers. I believe the next most after that is Austria or Brazil at 71, and that does go to the 305 kilometers distance. The average circuit length in Formula 1 these days is around 5 kilometers or 3.1 miles. Formula 1 is all about creating the fastest possible car to win as many races around the Formula 1 calendar as possible, but it's ironically the times when these cars are stationary, when they are being serviced by the pit crew during a pit stop, that the time that is actually spent there is very, very important. It can make or break your race. It can allow you to undercut, overcut, it can allow you to prevent being overcut or undercut during the pits and end up maintaining your position. Or if it's not a good pit stop, you can lose several. Pit stops in Formula 1 are regularly under 3 seconds, sometimes under even 2 seconds. So this is why they are so important in modern day Formula 1. There's no refueling now, it's all about the tyres, and the speed at which these guys and girls can change the tyres and service the car is nothing short of mesmeric. So here's everything you need to know about pit stops in Formula 1. Pit stops are a crucial aspect of Formula 1 racing, serving as several important purposes. During a pit stop, teams can change tyres, make necessary repairs or mechanical adjustments, and serve penalties. While refueling is currently not permitted in Formula 1, drivers are required to make at least one pit stop during the race to change tyres, as the high-performance tyres are designed to degrade quickly and last only one portion of a race distance. Of course, this mandatory pit stop is only required during dry races. In wet races, you do not have to do this, but in dry races, you have to run at least 2 compounds of tyres. So for example, a soft and a hard, a medium and a hard, or a soft and a medium. Of course, you can do more than one pit stop as well if your tyre wear is higher than what would be permitted for one pit stop. Pit lanes are located alongside the main straight of the track, with each team having a designated pit box, and that is for both drivers as well. So stacking sometimes happens when 2 drivers try to go into the pits for the same team at a relatively short amount of time, and of course you also get a lot of unsafe releases. You do get collisions in the pit lanes as well between different cars, and sometimes actually between the pit crew and the car, which can end in very nasty accidents indeed. The order of the pit box is determined by the team's qualifying rankings. A pit crew can consist of up to 20 mechanics, each with a specific role in servicing the car during a pit stop. The decision to make a pit stop is based on several factors, and I've gone into a lot of these during our pit stop strategy explained video as well. If you want to go check that out, please do, of course. But yeah, there's a lot of different factors and a lot of different simulations. Millions if not billions of different scenarios are indeed simulated to try and determine which is the best one to do. And you've got a whole team of people back at the team base as well, also going over what is the best to do. The strategy department is much more than the few people that you see on the pit wall. They're just the most visible part of it. Teams closely monitor tyre performance and use predictive models to determine the optimal lap time for a pit stop. The team communicates with the driver, usually 1 lap before the scheduled stop, to prepare for the upcoming pit entry. But of course, you don't want to telegraph what you're doing strategy wise. And of course, you also see sometimes race engineers. They're the people who actually speak to the driver, saying do what he doesn't. So if he pits, you stay out. If he doesn't pit, you go into the pits. Now, during a pit stop, the cars enter the pit lane adhering to the specific speed limit, normally 80 kilometers an hour, but around some circuits it's less at 50 kilometers an hour. And the stop is precisely designated in the pits box, so you have to hit your markers perfectly, otherwise the pit crew, which are very much aligned to go at a certain angle and a certain time, they may be put off by that, and you could end up having a slow stop. For example, the person with the gun that actually takes the wheel off, if they're having to readjust at the last second, it can be very difficult for them to do so. And these tenths of a second are absolutely vital in Formula 1. Mechanics swiftly change all 4 tyres, making necessary adjustments to the front wing angle and address any other issues the car may have. This process is completed in a matter of seconds, with the fastest pit stop taking just over 2 seconds, just under now actually. I think the record is 1.9 by Red Bull. They might have actually done a 1.8 actually. The fewer pit stops a driver makes during a race, the more time they can spend on the track, potentially gaining an advantage over the competitors. However, the decision to make fewer pit stops must be balanced against the risk of tyre degradation, which can significantly impact the car's performance and handling. Things like if they're stuck in traffic, if they're stuck behind a car that they can't quite overtake, the temperature, the weather, that can all play a factor, and just how the driver's feeling out on track too. I'll just tell you guys a little story just to round out this video as well with pit stops. Now, my auntie, I spent an afternoon with her ages ago, and the F1 was on. I think it was Bahrain Grand Prix 2020 or something like that, I don't know. And she's not into racing, she's not really into sports that much. She's in her 80s, bless her. If you're somehow watching this, Auntie Kath, love you, but I seriously doubt this because she can't really work computers very well. But she put the F1 on for me, which was very nice of her to do, and she had no idea what was going on for the whole thing. I was trying to explain what was happening, but she just didn't get it. It's just too much of a learning curve, you know. But the one thing she reacted to, the one thing that she was impressed by, was the pit stop. She went wow when she saw one of the cars come into the pits, because she couldn't believe how many people worked in unison within less than 3 seconds to change all the tyres on the car. You think about that. You think about what you can do in 3 seconds. And not a lot. Really not a lot. You can't even send a text message in 3 seconds unless it's like a thumbs up if you're a dad like me, or an okay sign if you're a dad like me, you know. So you know, there is that as well. But yeah, I think that does illustrate how impressive these guys and girls are that do these pit stops. It's something that we take for granted in Formula 1, but it is absolutely unbelievable how they do it. It's fantastic. And from a person point of view, from an organization point of view, not a technical point of view, because things, you know, the power units and stuff like that, which I think they're unbelievably impressive, but from a person point of view, for that many people to do that many jobs that quickly without mistake. I mean, they make mistakes sometimes, but it's very rare. And if they do make a mistake, oh, that was half a second too slow. Again, half a second, mate. Think about what you can do in that time. Blink? That's kind of it, really. While a lot of slang terms in Formula 1 will be familiar to long-time viewers, we were all new ones. We all had our first Grand Prix that we either attended or watched on the TV. So it's important to try and understand what the commentators, the drivers, the race engineers, and everybody associated with Formula 1, even the content creators such as myself, are talking about when it comes to certain terms that are sometimes unique to Formula 1, but usually at least unique to racing. If you watch other racing series, you might already know what a lot of these things mean. I'm just going to go through them now. This is part of the beginner's guide series to Formula 1 here on the F1Chronicle.com. So let's dive in, guys. Let's go with some slang terms and explain what they mean in Formula 1. We'll do this in alphabetical order, and we'll start with backmarker. A backmarker is a driver or car that is significantly slower than the leaders and is often lapped during the race, usually due to being in an uncompetitive car or having a performance disadvantage. Last year in 2024, I'd say the proper backmarker of the grid were the Sauber's cars. You know, they were the slowest by some distance, and they usually finished lapped and last in the race as well. Blistering, graining. Blistering is when the cold surface of the track causes pieces of the tyre to blow out of the surface because the inside of the tyre is warmer. Graining is the opposite of this. It is a situation when the tyres are cold and the hotter track surface often causes the rubber chunks to come off the tyre. So yeah, basically if the tyres are too hot for the surface, if the tyres are too cold for the surface, that can cause a lot of problems. You're much more likely to get something like this during the extremes of something like Las Vegas, where it's very cold, or a really hot one such as Brazil later in the season. Bottoming out. When the underside of the car comes in contact with the track at high speed, it is referred to as bottoming out. It happens because of the uneven tracks and in cases of sudden rise or crest. You get a shower of sparks when the car bottoms out because F1 cars use titanium skid blocks underneath their chassis. This is something that is particularly apparent. I mean, it doesn't happen more often, but it's particularly apparent during night races. You get a lot more sparks there because it's darker and the sparks show up a lot more because of that. You also get it in this generation of cars a lot more as well because of things like the ground effect causing porpoising, which is where the car kind of vibrates from end to end and therefore causes a lot more sparks. Teams have got on top of that for the most part these days, but you still do sometimes see it, particularly when their cars are being run on the edge in terms of setup. Box. I'm not talking about cardboard boxes, I'm talking about pit stops. Boxes is a reminder to the drivers to come in for a controlled stop in the pits, such as a tyre change or if they need to change their front wing. The word is derived from the German word Boxenstopp, which means to do a pit stop, and it just comes across very clearly on the radio, box, box, box. It can't be misconstrued for something else very easily. Brake bias. Brake bias is when drivers adjust the difference between how much the front wheels brake and the rear wheels brake. Normally both the front and the rear wheels will brake equally when the driver pushes down on the brake pedal. In wet conditions, the driver may want to increase the braking in the rear tyres to reduce the front wheels. It's basically to stop the tyres locking up, and therefore you lose grip, you damage the tyres, your brakes are getting too hot. You don't want that. You want to adjust the brake bias so that you go into corners with the optimum amount of braking power there, whether it's just to make sure it's the correct amount pretty much, because otherwise you're in trouble. You're going to lose lap time as a result. Dirty air and clean air. Dirty air is the turbulent air that's left in the wake of the preceding car. So when a car in front of you races off into the distance, they will leave a wake of dirty air. Clean air is the opposite. When there's no cars in front of you, the air is effectively natural, shall we say, undisturbed, I think is the best way to probably say that. So therefore your aerodynamics are going to work the best in clean air, and they're not going to work very well in dirty air. I've got a whole video going over that. I think it was one with Ed Bernardin, so do check that out if you've not already, of course. DRS, which stands for the drag reduction system. This allows cars to open a flap in their rear wing to get a performance advantage in a straight line by reducing the overall drag. You can do this during the DRS zones in practice and qualifying, and during races and sprint races when there is a sprint race in the weekend. That can be used when you're within 1 second of the car in front at the DRS detection point, and you can even use it on cars that are 1 second ahead of you when they are almost a lap down as well. The system does not differentiate between lap cars or soon to be lap cars and cars on the lead lap. Falling off the cliff. Sounds dramatic, and it is, to be fair. It's all to do with tyre wear. The way that the Pirelli tyres are designed in Formula 1, they're basically designed to fall off the cliff in terms of performance. They give a lot of performance for the amount of laps they are meant to, but their performance, their overall grip, falls off a metaphorical cliff. It's very sharp in decline in terms of overall performance. Therefore, that phrase has become very common in Formula 1. You don't want your tyres to fall off the cliff round a lap because you'll lose several seconds and have to come in for the pits and lose probably a few places as a result. Now, I spoke about locking up before, but I didn't mention the word flat spot. Flat spots is what happens when a tyre is locked up and the part of that tyre that is effectively dragged along the surface of the road while it isn't moving. Because when you lock up a wheel, the wheel does not rotate. It's an under rotation. It does not rotate. So therefore, one patch of the tire is making contact constantly with the road, and that excess friction causes a flat spot. It basically means that your tire is going to really vibrate. Look at Kimi Raikkonen at Nürburgring 2005. If you want to see what a really bad flat spot can do to your Formula 1 car, spoiler alert, it can destroy your entire suspension. So when you get one, it's no laughing matter. Green track. A green track is an almost unused track that cars and drivers encounter on the first day of practice, or in fact, if there was rain between sessions, that can often wash away, that's the term, wash away all of the marbles out on the track. The marbles, of course, being bits of discarded tire, which is another one on this list, which I've just skipped a bit ahead to there. But because of that, basically, there's less grip on the track. When a green track is there, it basically means that it's very low grip, so be careful when going out there. You can't push 100%. That is often why we see lap times improve as the weekend goes on, because more and more rubber is laid down. Therefore, there is more grip on the track. Lift and coast. If a driver feels that he is going to run out of fuel before the end of the race, one technique to actually save fuel is to lift and coast. So instead of accelerating constantly towards a braking zone and then hitting the brakes straight away, you will actually lift off the throttle a little earlier and use the aerodynamic drag of the aerodynamic devices on your car to slow the car down. This basically, it actually saves you some brakes, of course, but most importantly, it saves you some fuel because you are on the throttle for less time around the lap. Refueling is not allowed in Formula 1, so you can't come in to actually do a fuel stop even if you wanted to. So lifting and coasting is often the way that drivers actually maintain their fuel load and get to the end of the race as a result. Oversteer and understeer. Anybody that drives cars will probably know what this is already, but I will briefly explain what understeer and oversteer is. Understeer is effectively when you are taking too much speed into a corner for the amount of grip that you have. So basically, let's just say there's a right-hand turn. You try and go around that corner at the appropriate speed you think. You turn the wheel, but unfortunately, you're still not going quite right enough to get around that corner. And therefore, in the Formula 1 sense, you go off the track, you hit the curb, you might go into the gravel trap, you might go over a sausage curb or something like that. And because of that, you therefore lose time. That is what understeer is. If you had more grip or you took the corner more slowly, you would have been able to get around it. Oversteer is kind of the opposite, really. So oversteer is basically where you have too much speed and you lose the rear end of the car, you lose control of that. Oversteer can often actually happen as well when it comes to getting on the throttle. That's basically the usual way it happens. So you get on the throttle, you think you're doing it an appropriate amount, but unfortunately the rear tires don't have enough grip. Just like with understeer, how the front tires didn't have enough grip to get around the corner, oversteer doesn't have enough grip to actually safely apply the pop throttle. You'll get some wheel spin, your car will kind of jink from side to side a little bit, tire wear is increased because of that, and you'll lose time on top of it as well. So both are very bad in a Formula 1 sense, and both can be remedied by alternating your driving style, getting some fresher tires, or changing the setup of the car depending on what point of the weekend you're in. Pole sitter. A pole sitter is the driver who sets the fastest lap in qualifying and therefore starts from P1 on the grid for the race, aka pole position. Power unit. Now, Formula 1 engines are very complicated these days, but I of course went through that already in a different video, but power unit is basically the collection of components which makes up what is commonly known as the engine, but technically the engine, the ICE, the internal combustion engine unit, is only part of the power unit. You've also got other parts on there such as the MGUK, the MGUH, the control electronics, and the energy store as well for all the electronic parts of what a modern Formula 1 car is. All of those, of course, being made much larger in terms of the overall percentage of the power that it produced from 2026. Engines in Formula 1, or power units in Formula 1, I should say, produce around 1,000 horsepower, aka a lot. And the last one, all that power has to go somewhere, and if you get on the throttle a bit too hard, you might cause a tank slapper. A driver is said to have got a tank slapper when a sideways movement causes the rear end of the car to step out of line. It looks dramatic, it looks cool, but it's an oversteer moment, and it's a lot slower doing it that way, and it wears your tyres out more too. But hey, You'll get a lot of style points for doing it, just probably not Grand Prix points, Formula 1 points for doing that. But yeah, those are some Formula 1 slang terms, Formula 1 jargon. What's your favourite bit of Formula 1 slang, the terminology that, you know, we use in the pinnacle of motorsport? For me, I just love box. I think that's a really simple one. It's one of the things that if you say it to anybody in the street, they'd be like, what are you doing? A box? You're boxing. What does that mean? Are you punching them out? Like, what's going on? But it turns out it just means something completely different in Formula 1 because it comes from another language. So what's your favourite, guys? Let us know in the comments below. Formula 1 commands a massive global audience. Billions of people follow the sport, whether on television, whether in newspapers, whether on social media, whether through streaming. There's a lot of ways to keep up to date with Formula 1, but something that a relatively small percentage of people actually do is go and attend a Grand Prix weekend, which admittedly is not the cheapest thing to do. And even if you live relatively close to a circuit or you're in the same country as a circuit, such as a lot of British people being in the same country as the British Grand Prix, it ain't the cheapest to attend. Personally, for me, I don't think I could afford going to the British Grand Prix as a fan. It's a very expensive thing to do, which is one of the big negatives when it comes to that. But why should you attend a Grand Prix? What are the positives to going and seeing Formula 1 in person? Now, as someone who has been to 5 Grand Prix and 4 different circuits around the world, I want to give my take on this. But let's just go down the actual basics of this first. What actually happens during a Grand Prix weekend, and why should you attend this in person? Well, the fundamental is that Grand Prix weekends are held over 3 days from Friday to Sunday. Now, there used to be an exception for this, Monaco being the king of exceptions in Formula 1, where their practice sessions were held on a Thursday, but that has now changed. It's on a Friday. So it's Friday to Sunday every single weekend where there is an F1 weekend. Now, the sessions that take place do vary quite a bit depending on whether it's a sprint weekend or a non-sprint weekend. For the regular weekends, for 18 out of the 24 race weekends, you've got 2 practice sessions that take place on Friday, as well as another 3rd practice session that takes place on Saturday morning. Again, this is a generalization because sometimes, depending on the circuit, you might have night races, you might have dusk races that are taking place in the evening, such as Abu Dhabi, but the majority of Formula 1 races still take place during the day, where the races happen on a Sunday afternoon. But just speaking about that as well, qualifying takes place on Saturday afternoon for most circuits. Now, for sprint weekends, it is slightly different. There is one free practice session which takes place on a Friday morning. Then you have sprint qualifying on Friday afternoon, the sprint race on Saturday morning, and then the regular qualifying for the actual Grand Prix itself on a Saturday afternoon, and then the Sunday race is still the same. Again, some of these are held at night, so it's a bit off with the timings, but that's the general running order of what a race weekend is. But around that as well, you also get the kind of the show that is Formula 1, things that you really wouldn't expect if you've never been to a race weekend. I mean, at Silverstone, for example, there are stalls selling drinks and food throughout the venue. Most venues will have a lot of things for fans to take, activities to take part in. I mean, things like, did they call it the Batarang, the thing where you can like press the buttons and test your reaction times, that you can do things like that. There's a lot of things like that around there. Again, the more popular races such as those in Europe will have a lot more of those, but I think it's a really cool thing to be a part of. You can see the cars from different parts of the track as well. I mean, even if you've got a general admission, you can get around to most good vantage points on the track. You won't have a seat, of course, because those are the grandstand tickets, but you can still see Formula 1 cars going around your favourite circuit. And seeing, for example, cars go up Eau Rouge for the first time ever in person is something you'll never forget. And just seeing Formula 1 cars in person as well, the actual sense of speed, the television does not do it justice. The sound as well, people complain about the sound being so quiet these days. It's not. It's still loud. It's not as loud as it used to be, of course, but it's still really, really loud. So going to the races does give you a completely different appreciation, really, when it comes to that. And I really, really highly recommend you do it as just even as just a one-off. I mean, it's not the most expensive thing to do. You know, you could treat it as a holiday. If you go to, I don't know, Hungary is one of the cheapest places to go to when it comes to F1 races. Budapest is not a particularly expensive city either. You can get to and from the race pretty easily. You kind of double it up as a sightseeing tour of the city and also a break where you get to go to see Formula 1 as well. If you do it like that, then it's like, well, even if you didn't like the experience of Formula One that much, you still get a holiday out of it. So I really recommend that people do it. If you have the time, the money to be able to do it, I do recommend that. It's not the cheapest thing to do. Like I said, there are some races that are very expensive to go to, things like Miami and Las Vegas in the US. Oh boy, I don't even want to think how expensive those tickets are, but some might actually surprise you. Like Monaco is not the worst to do. If you do it on a budget and you're very frugal, you can actually do Monaco for not that expensive as a price, really, depending on the ticket you get. So I would really recommend it. There is nothing quite like actually going to Formula One races themselves. You can't replicate that. TV does a good job of conveying what it's like, but actually being there, being in amongst it, being around the same circuit as all these famous drivers, your favorite drivers in the world, seeing them in person, seeing them up on the podium, that is something that you'll never forget, and the overall fan experience is fantastic. I personally have not had a negative experience when it comes to going and attending Formula One. Every single time I felt very welcome. I've met people, we've had great conversations, because you know what it's like going to a football game. You're there for the same reason. You're there to watch this sporting event. You have that common interest, you have that conversation starter, and I've met some friends that I've, still talk to nearly a decade on, even after going to my first race. So I cannot recommend it highly enough, and I can't put into words what the actual experience is like. I hope I've conveyed that decently to you guys. You guys have probably been to quite a few races yourselves, of course. If you're watching this, I can imagine a few of you guys have, of course. So for those that haven't, I recommend you do. For those that have, share your experience in the comments. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Which is your favorite F1 race that you've experienced? Like, which is your favorite track to go to? For me, Silverstone is absolutely fantastic. If you take the money out of it, I think that's incredible. But if you put the money back in, Spa is head and shoulders when it comes to that. If you're a pure racing fan and you love seeing cars doing feats that you just think are now impossible for you to even attempt, Spa is great for that. From a spectator point of view, it's not the best because it's very difficult to get around. The weather's terrible. It's in the middle of nowhere. But if you wanted a pure racing experience, I can't recommend Spa enough. But if you wanted a cheap and cheerful trip away to go and watch the F1 with a great city to do as well, Hungary. Go to Hungary. Hungary's the cheapest ticket on the calendar, I think. It's not expensive for flights. Accommodation isn't expensive. And obviously being around Budapest is not the most expensive city anyway. Definitely a lot cheaper than even a lot of places in the UK, really. So yeah, those are my kind of thoughts on it, guys. Let us know yours in the comments below. Thanks for sticking with us to the very end of this video, going through the complete beginner's guide to Formula One. Took a lot of time and effort to make this video, but we've also got an article on our website, f1chronicle.com, if you want to go check that out. That has even more detail, believe it or not, than this huge supercut compilation of all the videos going over the different subjects. And it's kind of abridged as well. It kind of goes through every subject in order as well. I've made an effort to do that. There are some subjects I didn't cover in video format just because it doesn't really lend itself very well to a video format video. But yeah, if you want to go check out the article, please do. If you want to check out our other videos here on the f1chronicle.com, we got loads of those. Thanks for all the support as always, guys. Like, share, comment, subscribe. You know how we do on here, and we'll see you very soon. Have a good one, guys.